Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members for being here today. Particularly, I want to pay tribute to those who are the family of the fallen in this epidemic that has become the fentanyl crisis, not just in the United States, but around the world. Look, trafficking of fentanyl has had major consequences in my home state of Iowa, particularly in the 3rd District. Even the august New York Times has written about how bad fentanyl has gotten in the small town of Osceola, just 30 minutes south of Des Moines. A community of 5,000 people. This drug does not discriminate, and it is harming people in all walks of life. I've been to the southern border. I've worked to combat human trafficking that transports Chinese manufactured fentanyl around the world through our ports of entry, through the country of Mexico, and ends up in our communities. Like you, I have spent time with ride-alongs with my law enforcement and as a former military member flying operations along the southern border. Every community, every county, every city in my state is now a border community as a result of this. The Iowa Department of Public Health reports that over the last 2 years, they have seen a 34% increase in drug death overdose, with fentanyl implicated in 83% of those statewide. Among young Iowans, those 25 and under, drug overdose deaths have increased by 120% in the last 24 months alone. We only expect these numbers to increase once new data is available, and the longer that we allow China to be the primary source of both fentanyl and the funding that operates this machine, the more dangerous we are all put. And while this is a major problem, Congress needs to respond. So I'm thankful that this committee is helping us to follow the money on where this can best be directed for implication. So, Mr. Eam, I'd like to begin with you. As a special agent and with the U.S. Patriot Act was enacted after 9/11, which included Title III, the International Money Laundering, Abatement, and Anti-Terrorism Financing Act. This title includes requirements to improve the government's ability to detect, prevent, and investigate money laundering. The Secretary, with a range of options, can use this to target specific money laundering operations, including what we're seeing here with the distribution of fentanyl. These tools help take proper action for the U.S. financial system to address these specific threats. I'd like to ask you, sir, in your experience, is there sufficient evidence that Mexican banks are allowing cartels to set up accounts to hide and move the proceeds of fentanyl trafficking? And do you believe the Secretary of the Treasury should use special measures provided in Section 311 to impose information gathering, reporting, and record-keeping requirements on those financial institutions?
Yes, absolutely. Not only Mexican cartel own bank accounts, but also those businesses that are also facilitating these cartels, the Chinese businessmen that are actually in Mexico and throughout South Central America that are using these accounts to leverage these parallel funds transfers that's continuing to fuel this entire crisis right now. Without the money, they can't continue producing these drugs. We need to cut the money off in the streets of the United States. And we're not doing as good of a job as we used to do, using the Patriot Act, using all the resources of the Treasury to cut off the ability for these financial institutions in Mexico, China, and elsewhere, whether a 311 sanction or an OFAC sanction. That's going to be one of the most effective ways of strangling their ability to continue this crisis.
Especially, I could not agree more. And the fact that we can have all the counter-drug programs here in the United States, until we cut off the funding supply of where this is coming from, we'll continue to see the challenges. One of my favorite members from history, Winston Churchill, highlights, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. While fentanyl is new, there are clearly some lessons learned from the past that we can bring forward. Would you be able to share with us, just from your perspective, how the DEA went after Pablo Escobar? Some of the success stories there are things that we can use here in going after the financing behind fentanyl, both in Mexico and coming from China.
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. The DEA in South America, specifically Colombia, at the time had the full support of the ambassador, the State Department, the intelligence community, and the military. They let DEA do their job. The Department of Justice allowed DEA to do their jobs, to go after these cartels, one person at a time. Every single person we were able to arrest, we were able to use their information to convince them to cooperate, to get to the next level, use that evidence to get to the highest pinnacles, identify their accountants and their lawyers that were propping them up, the entire organization, the Cali cartel as well. We cut them off after we identified their money flow streams from the United States to Colombia. Once we identified their money facilitators, cut them off from the cartel members, sanctioned the Cali cartel front businesses, the entire businesses. They own the so-called CVS of Colombia. We cut that off after OFAC and DEA helped sanction those companies.
Gentleman,
Now
time
they
has
had no
expired.
funds.